Between 1068 and 1071, William faced a series of rebellions from across England, ranging from the marshes in Norwich to the March at Oldham's bordering Wales. However, the rebellions in the north forced William to react on a scale never seen before. Two villages in West Yorkshire, Shepley to the west and Lower Cumberworth to the east, are recorded in the Domesday Survey of 1086 to have been scorched and laid waste by Norman soldiers. In 1086, they are recorded to have a lot less people and livestock than they did just 20 years prior in the January of 1066. They are, in fact, just two examples of the hundreds of villages across the north of England that were destroyed under William's orders in the winter of 1069 to 1070. To find out why, we need to go back to 1068. What follows is a complicated story of resistance, destruction, and murder.
The Earls Edwin and Morcar, increasingly frustrated with the lack of authority that they were being given after 1066, decided to rebel against William the Conqueror and started a rebellion in the north. William reacts really quickly, which is characteristic of William. He charges up north, he then charges forward and takes York and puts an end to the rebellion before it really can begin.
However, although this short-lived revolt was over, resistance still continued. In the spring of 1069, a series of revolts began in the north that threatened William's reign because of the combination of forces involved. These were the Anglo-Saxon Northumbrian rebels in the north, Edgar Atheling in Scotland, who had the backing of the Scottish king Malcolm III, and King Sweyn of Denmark, who was making his own claim to the throne by sending a fleet of ships and a band of warriors to team up and help Edgar and the Northumbrian rebels. Trigger cause for these revolts was probably the death of William's most trusted Norman Earl, Robert Cummin. Because of the rebellions in the north, William replaced the old Saxon Northumbrian Earl Morcar with Cummin, and on his way north, Robert Cummin launched attacks on the locals to stamp his authority. But when he got to Durham, he was warned about how his violent methods was causing resentment, and then was brutally murdered by an Anglo-Saxon angry rebel. This rebelliousness and uprising against Norman control then ended up spreading to York, where many Norman troops were also murdered. Edgar the Atheling and his supporters came down from Scotland and joined the rebels, launching an attack on a Norman garrison in York Castle. Once William heard about this, he raced north and then managed to rout the rebels.
William's response was typically fast. He was well known for responding before his enemies could really consolidate their rebellion. He rushes up north, he takes York by storm, sacks York Cathedral, and he starts the construction of a second castle.
Edgar escaped back to Scotland and William went back to London. However, it doesn't stop here. Through the summer of 1069, King Sweyn of Denmark assembled a fleet, which arrived at the English coast at the start of September. Raiding up the east coast, the Danes met up with Edgar's troops, who was down again from Scotland in mid-September. This coordinated attack was a significant threat to William. Not only did the Danes have allies in the Danelaw, but now Anglo-Saxons across England could join Edgar against the Normans. The Anglo-Danish combined army marched on York, reaching it on the 21st of September. It slaughtered around 3,000 Normans, and the castles were destroyed, taking plunder back to the fleet. William's control of England was under enormous pressure.
Particularly in this instance, the pressure comes from the fact that Edgar and Sweyn are joining forces. William's sort of policy in the north has been largely to build castles and give most of his lands to important Norman magnates in the south. This doesn't work out very well for him. The south has rebellions, but none of them become quite so powerful as the revolts in the north, partly because you've got Edgar across the border in Scotland, and then you've got places like York where it's easy for fleets to sail inland and really support whatever revolt might be going on. We could ask the question, what if Edgar and Sweyn had been successful? Would Sweyn have just been like, fine, I'm off home, you can have the kingdom? But for William, this coming together of two important fellas with powerful supporters was a big deal.
To deal with these two powerful rebels, William decided to go back north with an army.
He pays off the leader of the first Danish fleet and sort of encourages him to leave.
But dealing with the Anglo-Saxon rebels was proving to be a lot more difficult. They refused to meet William in open ground, scattering into the surrounding woodland and countryside as he advanced, then launching attacks onto his men as soon as he went away to deal with rebellions elsewhere. Once William left for another rebel hotspot, rebellions flared up again. This was guerrilla warfare. William's solution was to stop these rebellions once and for all.
He sends his troops out all over the place, whether they're finding rebels or not, to destroy farms, destroy livelihoods, slaughter livestock by the thousands, salt the earth so nothing can grow, and make sure that the area is depopulated. It's not an attempt to murder every living soul they can possibly find, but it's an attempt to depopulate, leave no stone unturned, and leave no hiding place for any rebels that might still be around.
The Harrying of the North is an infamous episode. It took place in 1069 to 1070 and affects, in a very profound way, the north of England. Essentially, it's a punitive military operation by William the Conqueror against the area around York to put down a revolt, but also really to punish the people of the area, to punish the people of the countryside for revolting against Norman control.
I think William is aware that as a king, he has to be seen to punish. Regret might have come in on a personal kind of spiritual, religious level. William was certainly religious, as the vast majority of people were at the time. But he knows that if he appears weak, he cannot continue to control England. He has adopted kind of an escalation policy with these rebellions. Starting with Exeter in 1068, he forgives Exeter. There are a few executions, but largely they get away unscathed. Later on in York, the first time York rebels, he burns York. This time, he goes all out to punish.
According to historical sources, the Normans devastated great swathes of the landscape during this harrying. It's recorded that bodies lay unburied in the streets. It's recorded that the villages were left completely uninhabited for great areas of the north of England.
The emotional reaction is really prevalent in the source material. People like Derek Vitalis, who was half English himself and half Norman or French, writes a great deal about how awful this was, the pain and suffering that people endured. There's a lot of anger, particularly from the church, about the damage that's been done to the church, to sacred relics, to sacred spaces. And of course, the suffering of the peasants, though not recorded in quite a direct way, we don't get peasants writing about this stuff, was clearly pretty severe. So the emotions would have been fear, anger, grief, all sorts of things like that.
The harrying of the North was widely criticised, including by the Pope. William devoted much time and money to the church for the rest of his reign in order to make amends for what he had done. What is sure, though, is that William's response to these rebellions was definitive. There were no further uprisings in Northumbria. William had a firmer grip on the north of England and further secured his control of his new kingdom.